My name is Tauheedah Jabaar Jones, and basically my story is about escape from domestic violence and becoming a victor afterwards. So the very first marriage was when the domestic violence began. I was married 3 times, but married to the same man through 3 different men. Became pregnant with my very first child. And this child's father and I stayed together through high school until I was approximately 18 years old. And then we broke up. That was a sweetheart relationship, but it was just that we were so young, we didn't have the tools to cope with things that were going to come at us as young parents. Then when I turned 21, I joined a local mosque and became a Muslim. I married this gentleman. He was from the same town as I was, came from a big family just like I did, but I do believe that there were some mental issues going on that I was not aware of. He was very forceful, kind of into the arts as far as Tai Chi, Taekwondo, those type of things. So this child that I already had was a target of his to kick him around, abuse him when I wasn't around. And so when I found out what he was doing, I demanded that he stop, and that was when the arguments began with us. He would take him outside at 4:30 in the morning and want him to practice Taekwondo with him out in the yard, and I was against that because my son had to go to school and he was just a little kid. He kicked me one day in my stomach, and I had just had the twins were only 3 months old. And so when he kicked me in my stomach, I became frightened and angered and all of those emotions that would come out in a situation like that. And I left our home and went down to my parents' home. And there I resided with my parents for a few months, got my own small little apartment. This is where all my troubles really began. Religion itself was something that I embraced and enjoyed, but it was just the practices of different people and their opinions and things like that that I felt started a snowball into, I want to say, giving permission to control their wives within that religion. We were told things to do as far as the religion. Getting married completes 50% of your religion. So there was a pressure on you to want to please God. So therefore you want to get married so that you can complete half of your religion. I was instructed, coaxed, downright having people say, you need to get married. When my brother joined, his best friend also joined with him. And the best friend was the person that I ended up marrying because he was single, I was single, so I chose him, or maybe we chose each other. During my pregnancy, I didn't know what was going on, but I know that I craved ice. So I ballooned up from 120 pounds to almost 300 pounds. I had started to become almost immobile. When the onset of the labor began, I had a doctor's appointment that day, and the doctor told me as soon as you start feeling tightness, which would be contractions, to contact me, and when they get about 3 or 4 minutes apart, we're going to put you in the hospital, which is what I did. Once I was at the hospital, he went with me to the hospital, but he didn't stay with me during the whole procedure. Delivery went smoothly, but at the time after I delivered the children, I was having some complications with the excessive water. They captured all the fluid that I was losing once I had the twins, and it ended up being about 10 1-gallon water jugs full of fluids. Once that happened, they put me in recovery, and as soon as I went to recovery, I was up and out the bed and down to the nursery to see the babies. And he came to the hospital the day that they told me I was going to be released. Now, one of the twins came home. The girl twin had jaundice, so she was left at the hospital, and I would go back and forth breastfeeding her every day. The twins were about 2 months when he started pushing on me. We took the twins home, and the verbal abuse began. And the day that I walked out of our home, we were arguing about finances and not enough money, not enough diapers, not enough food. He came into the room and he was screaming at me about he didn't have a job and I couldn't go back to work yet. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do? And I think that questions like that kind of set him off, because he didn't know what we were going to do. But it was like, don't ask me what we're going to do. We got to figure it out. And so he turned around and he pushed me, and I rolled up against the wall. So I turned around and I looked at him like, what are you doing? What is wrong with you? And I think when I asked him something like, what's wrong with you? That was like a little dynamite that was set off, because he didn't want anybody to ask him what was wrong with him, knowing that he had an anger problem. So then he turned around and like I said, he practiced Taekwondo. So he did one of his roundhouse kicks and he kicked me in my stomach. And when he did that, a red light went off and I'm like, I gotta get out of here. So I sucked it up and he turned and he left. And when I saw him walking down the street, I packed a bag as fast as I could. I grabbed the 3 kids and I hightailed it down to my mom's house and told them what happened and asked them if I could stay there with them. And of course they agreed that I could stay there. That was the last marriage. So I was about 24 years old. In 1979, I moved away from this small town that I lived in and decided that I was going to take my 3 children and moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And the reasoning behind moving to Atlanta, Georgia was because I had become pen pals with a guy who was a prisoner in Reidsville State Penitentiary in Georgia. In becoming pen pals with him, I moved to Georgia to be closer to where he was, because we began to visit at the prison. But during the time that I was visiting this man in the prison, there was another gentleman who stopped me in the street and was like, how beautiful you are, and you're a Muslim. I said, you're a Muslim? I'm a Muslim, but I'm from Gambia. I started talking to this young man, and when that happened, I became intimate with him and found out that I was pregnant now with the 4th child. We decided that we needed to get married because of religious reasons, the way it'll look, the way people will think. I wrote to my pen pal and explained what was happening to him. I wrote it like a Dear John letter, and he did not like that. He wrote to the minister, he wrote to my parents, and I still to this day have that letter that he wrote. But it was a very sinister letter about how I had promised to be his wife, and in promising to be his wife, I had committed adultery. That's a little kind of getting ahead of it, but I needed to give you that snippet to understand what was happening. I married my second husband, and when we got married, we ended up, over the course of 5 years, having 3 sons. So that escalated to the point where police were called, where I was trying to get protection against him. He ended up taking 2 of his biological sons and running away to Virginia, and his family intervened, and he was there for about 2 weeks with them until his family called me and said, you need to come and get your children. He's putting the children off on us, and we have jobs. We can't take care of your children. And so I ended up getting a flight out, went and picked up the boys and brought them back home. He became more and more abusive. And one night I was pregnant with the last of his 3 biological children. He came home from a tournament, the local tournament in the city we were in it right there in Atlanta. He had won, but he didn't drink, but he smoked cigarettes, but he just had that temper. I was about 8 months pregnant, and he wanted to have intimate relations with me, and I refused. I was in pain. He had been gone all day. The kids were all in the bed. It was just something that I just refused. I was not going to do. He chased me around that apartment for almost an hour, around the kitchen table, around the furniture in the living room. So finally, I started reciting a prayer, and in Arabic, which he understood because he was fluent in Arabic, and asking God to put protection on me. And once I did that, it was like he stopped in his tracks. It's almost like he came to his senses as to what he was doing, and he let me alone. He continued this tirade for the next couple of days, and I asked him to leave the house. So he left the house, but he came back like in the evening, late evening. And me and the children were there alone. I had the children help me to barricade the front door in order to keep him out. We barricaded the front door. He busted the window on the side of the door and was trying to get his hand in to unlock the door. And we took brooms, and the kids were taking their tracks to their cars, and we were beating his hands to try to keep him from getting the door unlocked. I called the police. The police came, and he left when he saw the police cars coming. But when the police came and talked with me, they told me that, did he get mail here? Yes, he does. Are his clothes here? Yes, they are. They said, well, in that case, he lives here, so you can't put him out. And I was confused because he's trying to hurt us. But they says, well, he's your husband, and in other words, you got to suck it up because he's your husband and this is what you asked for. They left. When that happened, it just put me on high alert that this is something I was going to have to get myself out of. This was 5 years. Finally, after 5 years of marriage, some of the other Muslim brothers in the community had a talk with him, and I don't know what the talk entailed, but he did finally start leaving us alone. And then I found out he finally moved to Alabama. And when he did that, it kind of gave me a sigh of relief. One evening, I was downtown Atlanta, and I was headed to my doctor's office. Everything I did was by MARTA, the bus service there in Atlanta. So I was waiting on one bus to catch it to go out to my doctor's office. And when I did that, the guy who I was writing to in prison walked up to me. He had been paroled. And when he walked up to me, I stopped in my tracks, and it's like my heart stopped beating because he had a life sentence. And when he walked up to me, I was so frightened and afraid because I knew I had sent him a Dear John letter, and I knew what his reaction had been to that information that I was going to marry somebody else. But when he walked up to me, he was like, don't be afraid. I would never hurt you. I love you. But I want to talk to you. Where are you going? And I told him I was going to my doctor's office, rode to the doctor's office with me, waited on me, and then walked me back to the bus and rode the bus back downtown with me. And during that ride and that conversation, I let my guard down, and I said, well, this might not be so bad because he did love me, and he's out, and he was dressed nice, he smelled good, and I was like, well, maybe this is gonna be something. We ended up starting a relationship, and we were married. We got married. I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, but we were married for 7 years. Once he asked me to marry him, I accepted, and the children all loved him. He loved children. Once we got married, it seemed like it was a fairy tale marriage for 4 years. I cut off communication with my family, my friends. My mom and dad were worried, but they were living in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm living in Atlanta, Georgia. So there was quite a bit of distance between us. But the communication was still there via telephone, as long as I waited until he came home from work so that he could get on the extension and be able to talk to them too. And his reasoning was, I love your mom and dad, and so don't call them until I'm home so I can talk to them and say hi also. And I was not realizing that was another control method. After the 4th year, things changed. By this time, my twins were approximately 10 and 11, somewhere right around that age. And my daughter reached puberty. And when she reached puberty, things changed in the household. I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew that there was a shift in the air. All of a sudden, my husband did not want her outside. He did not want her walking with the kids, walking with anybody but her twin brother. I'd say that during the 5th year, I decided I needed to go back to work. Now, during the first 4 or 5 years of our marriage, he didn't allow me to work. But finally, I told him, I have to go back to work or I'm going to lose my sanity. We ended up having 3 children. So by now, I have 9 children. So by the time I had the last child, I went back to work, which was about our 5th year of marriage. My daughter would call me and say, Mom, he's in my room. He's going through my belongings. But there was one specific thing that happened that let me know positively without a doubt that he was abusing my daughter sexually. Him and I had went to the grocery store because he got off work late, I'd say 10 o'clock. So he would meet me at the train station and we would get in the car and go to the grocery store before we would come home. So we went to the store, we got groceries, we came home and we started unloading the groceries into the house. Now the twins babysat all the other children while we were out. So he was out in the car getting the groceries in. We got home with the groceries. When I walked in the door and looked down on the floor near the garbage can, there was some paper on the floor. So when I picked up the paper and I started kind of looking at the words before I threw it away to see what that was, on the paper it said stepfather molesting, a mother not listening to me, and so my antennas went up and I grabbed all the pieces of paper, stuffed them in my jeans, looked through the trash right quick, picked up those pieces, stuffed them in my jeans, and we continued to bring the groceries in. We went to bed. The house was quiet. I went into the bathroom, got a piece of scotch tape and taped that letter together and found out that he was molesting my daughter. And he was also her twin brother. He would hit him, beat him to keep him away so that the twin brother wouldn't be able to intervene. When I read that letter, took it and tucked it away, hid it, and I sat down for hours and tried to figure out how am I going to get out of this one with all these children. I got 9 kids now. So I ended up putting a plan together in my head that I was going to run away with these children to get away from him, knowing that he was an ex-felon and that he had promised me if I ever left him, he was going to kill me. She explained to me that he told her to keep her mouth shut. He's the boss, he's the father, he's this, he's that. And he had hit her upside her head. And then when she fell on the floor, he kicked her in her ribs. Once I questioned her about the letter in private, she explained to me that there was no way that I should have found the letter because she says she tore it up into such tiny pieces nobody could read it. Once I found that letter and read it and hid it away, I knew that I had to keep quiet. I knew that I had to carry on like everything was okay. So I started taking small plastic bags from the grocery store and packing socks in one bag, pants in another bag, and I would even take dollar bills because he controlled the money in the household. So it took me almost about 1.5 years to plot and plan to get away with him without him knowing that I knew what he was doing. But in the meantime, he was still sneaking into her room and having sexual relationships with her. And the reason I found that out was I was at work one day. She called me frantic. She kept a journal of everything that was going on, and she would hide that journal. She said he came in my room and he tried to have sex with me. She said, and for the first time I told him no. She said he got very angry and he started tearing my room up. So I ended up putting a plan together in my head that I was going to run away with these children to get away from him. Knowing that he was an ex-felon and that he had promised me, he went into my drawer and pulled things out and found my journal, Mom. She said, and he started reading that journal. She said, he took the journal outside. There was a field. She said, I think he burnt my journal out there in the field. She said, but it entailed everything that he's been doing to me. As I was planning the escape, I took a friend in confidence. She was a Atlanta Police Department detective, but she was my good friend. My daughter and I went over to her house and I told her what was happening, made her promise she would not say anything until we could get out of the house safely. She did promise, but she sent, cruisers by the house to kind of check the area every evening, just to see if anything was going on. One evening, things got really bad. So I called the police and he was still at work. They told me I needed to that they were going to, I told them what was happening sexually with my daughter and him. And they told me, we're going to come back by this evening. So when he got home from work, in order to like soften the blow, I told him what had happened. I said, she's accused you. I said, but I don't believe her. And the police never came. That evening, they never showed up. So when they didn't show up, he felt and boasted to all of us, you see, I'm the king of this castle. They know better than to come in here and mess with me because they know I'll blow all their behinds up. The day that I escaped, he went to work, took all of the belongings that I had stashed away in that car, and he had left his car at the house that day. So I packed everything up into the car. I got the kids, and well, I have to say, first I went to the police department, and when they took a deposition, they put out a warrant. They were going to arrest him. So at 8:20, we were in the police station, and it took 10 minutes to 2 before they finally were able to take this to the judge and get the order for them to pick him up and arrest him. And so when they picked him up to arrest him, they took him in, and that's when I took charge. We packed that U-Haul and we hightailed it away from that house. Once I realized that we actually were safe, felt like a whole new world opened up for me. I knew I could get a job. I knew I would be able to take care of my kids, and I knew that I wouldn't have to look across the room and be worried that he would be there and he would pop up. The feeling was elation. I was so happy to have all the kids together, and I used to always state to my children, we're all safe and we're all going to stay under the same roof, and I'm never going to let anything else bad happen to you. I just turned 69 years old this month. My children are all safe. They're grown. They have children. I have 22 grandchildren. I have 8 great-grandchildren and everything. I am now the director of a nonprofit called Swan Rider, and our mission is to help other victims of violence find the sense of safety that I found when I escaped my abuser. The advice that I would be able to give would be love doesn't have to hurt. And if you're in a situation where you're afraid, or you're being a victim of violence or whatever, financial, religiously, whatever your situation may be, there is always help out there.